Hello, and welcome back to our series where we are building a people and culture management system. This series is brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, founder and principal consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions. And in this video, I would really like to take a focus look at our scatter plot chart here. And I want to do some more dynamic enabling. So if you've been following along on the previous videos, this may look a little bit enhanced. And what I did was things that we have already covered in previous series, numerous times actually. I took another field and I added it here because it's nice to know how much the human resources division is actually paying for the base salaries of all its employees. So you'll see here out of the 78 employees, we're paying over $6.5 million just in that base salary. And then we can also do the same thing with, say developers or whatnot. Our developers are only pulling 634 of whatever budget that's coming from. And you'll also notice that what I did here was I created a trend line. So within the Google Charts documentation here, if you come over to Google Charts, their website that we looked at a couple episodes back, it'll show you how to work with those objects to create things such as, legends, the point size, the shapes, and whatnot. And what I did was I came down here and looked at the trend lines. And you can see the trend lines they need a curly bracket. And this is essentially the series. And with our scatter plot, our series that is showing is that 0. And then we can modify the trend line all right here. So that's what I added to our object. And you'll see that once we go back over. And then the same with the color. I just changed the color and whatnot. And what this trend line does is it's essentially the best way you can describe it for non-math people, I feel, is it is a line that truly fits the data the best way that it can. And the great thing about using the trend line is you're able to actually hover over that trend line and see some data in here. So trend lines are helpful, especially when we're looking at larger ones such as, HR or something like this. Now, a trend line that goes down with experience, I mean, unless this is built into your comp philosophy somehow, this isn't a good thing. But since all this is randomized, it really doesn't matter. Maybe once we get to the point to where we can, change, that's, start modifying these salaries to be more aligned with whatever comp philosophy we have, that'll change. The other good thing about this trend line here is if you come over and you hover, you'll notice that it has, some data, but then it has bolded data over to the right-hand side. And if you're not seeing this, I do apologize. I'm not sure exactly if this is popping up in the view or not when I share the screen. But if you're following along and you hover over your trend line data, on the far right-hand side of the box that's popping up is the experience and salary that you need. So this is actually incredibly helpful. Say you got an employee or a candidate with 20 years of experience and you're trying to figure out how much they pay, you just go up to the trend line, click on 20, and it'll tell you the best fit salary based on the data that you have, which would be $76,000 a year. Now, granted, this is also going downhill, so we don't want this, but I'll put together a series on conducting a salary analysis. But for now, I want to enhance this a little bit. So you'll also see that I put a somewhat of a tag up here. It's maybe an H6 tag to populate a title. And this title is the same title as this. And I also added 2 new fields. Now, these fields are here are hard coded, but what I would like to do is to allow the user to be able to, one, pick which type of trend line it is. We can easily come back here and change trend lines from linear, which is this, just a straight line, to a polynomial, which kind of follows the curve of the data as well. And I also eventually would like users to select the demographic in which they are doing this analysis. So you'll see that we have all employees, which is the division, and then we have this gender. So my thought is I would like to take this all employees piece right here and dynamically change it based on the division or the job title. And then the same thing with the gender. I would like to take that and change it based on whatever demographic it is that the user is wishing to analyze. So once we get this changed dynamically, then what we can do is simply just take this and put it as the title of our chart, which changes dynamically for everything. And we will also need to change our legend. And everything that we have up to this point allows us to do that. We just need to think about it in a way of what is happening, when is happening, and then once we get this created, then we can start adapting everything else to it. So let's focus first on this tag here. So we want to change all employees initially to whatever is being populated in the division and the job title. So let's come over here to our code and let's come down to our page. Let me make sure that this is good size for y'all so you can see what we're doing. And what we're going to need is the ID of that element here. Okay, so there's our trend line select box. There's our demographic. Here it is. So this right here is that header, I guess you can call it. And what I did was I used a strong and italicized tags. I wrapped all employees as well as the gender in it. And I also gave this H6 tag an ID of salary analysis header. Now we're going to need this to get the element of this so we can start modifying it. So let's come over here to our total rewards JS and let's start doing something with it. Now we don't necessarily need a separate trigger because if you remember, we already have a trigger going on when these boxes are changed. So what we can simply do is use this trigger to then populate this in just a separate line of code within that function. So let's come down here and find that code here. Okay, so this is the instruction box, and I did the instruction box just like we did in the records management. Okay, here we go, this get comp filter. So this function is set to be called anytime those two boxes change. So what we're able to do is to grab this and we can declare a couple more variables. We'll need the division and then we'll also need the demographic group. So let's create the demographic group first. And right now, let's just give this demographic, and it doesn't matter if it's here or not, or above that or below, because we're not going to work on the demographic yet. We're just wanting to give it a value. So let's create a variable and call this demographic group. And let's make that demographic group simply equal to gender right now. And then let's create another variable to capture that header text, that H6. So let's call this salary analysis header. And this is going to be equal to document.get element by ID. And that ID is going to be whatever ID it is over here. Salary analysis header. Okay, and we don't want to get the value of that quite yet because we're going to give it a value, not get a value. Okay, so then we're going to grab the ID from the target of whatever called this. And if the comp filter select, which is this, equals the comp division, then we want to do something with it. And what we're wanting to do is, as soon as we get the value of this comp division, we then want to place it inside this salary analysis header. We want it to populate right here, this all employee thing. We don't want to say all employee, we want to say division employees. So before we set the comp jobs value to choose, we can set the inner HTML of that H6. So what we can do is we can grab our salary analysis header variable and set the inner HTML to a new string. But what we want inside this string is to populate the all employees and the gender dynamically. So for that, we're going to use a literal, which remember is the back hashtag. Messing that all kinds of up. There we go. Okay. Back hashtag. And we can start writing a different statement that we would like to be produced in that. So we can do salary analysis for and then we can do a strong tag. Because remember, when we're doing HTML tags, that's why we're setting the inner HTML. Because we want these tags to be picked up. And then we're going to need italicized. And we're not going to do all employees because that's just the default. What we want to do is call whatever this comp division is, whatever value is stored in this variable. And since we're doing this dynamically with these back hashtags, we would do $, curly bracket, and then simply call the comp division. And then we can close out our I and then close out our strong. And then that should take care of that. And since we're going to have just the division name, we should probably type this for the division employees based on, and then we need that demographic. And again, we'll do a $, hashtag, and then we need this demographic group. And then we'll close out our I, and then close out our strong. And then we need to close out our literals and give it a semicolon. So now what we can do is let's test this out and make sure we got everything going, and then we can build out what happens later with the rest of the things. So let's come back here to our form here. We'll refresh it. Here we go. We're populating it. And now when we select division, this should dynamically change to whatever that division is. And it's not. So let's go see why. Let me make sure that we spelled everything right here. Salary analysis header. Sal, okay, so that's incorrect. That's comp division. So what I did was I did salary analysis header, when in actuality, I should have just change it up here. Let's change it up here so it's easier. So let's save this again and then go see if that did it. Okay, so let's refresh. Go back to finance. Okay, so let's go see. Something's kind of funky here. So let's take a look at this code and look at what we have going on here. Let's go look and see if this is actually right. I just pulled up the console log and by hitting F12 when we ran that, and it looks like it's not understanding what this is. So let's go see if we got that correct. Oh, no, we didn't. Sal analysis header. Okay, so let's come back over here and do this. Like so. And then the salary analysis header is being called here correctly. Okay, so now that should take care of it. So let's save it. And we'll come back over here and refresh. Okay, here we go. And there we go. Facilities. Oh, facilities doesn't look bad. At least they're going in the right direction. There's some stuff here going on, but at least they're somewhat going in the right direction when it comes to experience. Good job, facilities. But okay, so now that works. So now what we need to do is do the same exact thing with our coordinator piece. So we can come back over here and simply come down to our comp right here. And after it does a fetch, let's see, after it does our fetch data, and so let's think this through here real quick. So before it does this comp jobs thing, okay, so once it runs this, it's going to turn this into choose, which is good. And then if the comp division is choose, then what we want to do is we want to populate something else. Because remember, it should be back to the baseline. So let's come back over here and see if that's actually what happens. And it isn't. So we're going to have to manually change that. So what we can do is simply grab this and then if the comp division is choose, we want to set this to all employees. And this is going to be set to gender. Okay, that's good. So now what we can also do is come down here. That should take care of the reset. And if it's comp jobs, then we are going to need to essentially do the same thing, except a little different. So we still need to call the demographic group gender. And instead of the comp division, we're going to need the comp job. For the comp job, which will be the job title, for the employees in the such and such position, comma, based on blah, blah, blah. Okay, now we can take this. So that should be that, because we're taking comp jobs, the value of that and passing it here. And then if comp jobs is equal to choose, then we need to essentially reset it here. And then we'll run and fetch the data. Okay, so now let's My apologies. Got a little ahead of myself. So what I did here was I took this salary analysis, all employees, this is what we would want it to display if the division field was set to choose, which is resetting it. And this is what should be displayed initially. And then we come down here to this comp jobs. And if comp jobs is the one that triggered this piece, it's going to get the value of it. And then we want to set that analysis header to this. And we changed the wording a little bit, salary analysis for the employees in the comp jobs, that value positions based on that. And then we essentially created the same exact reset line here if comp jobs was also set to choose. So let's save this, and then let's come back here to our page, and we'll refresh it. It should be salary analysis for all employees indicating gender. Okay, so we may need to use that language instead, but salary analysis for division for the facilities division employees based on gender. And now if this is set to choose all employees based on gender, and then this one here is for the employees in the developer positions based on gender, and this should be choose, and it'll go back there. So what I would like to do is we're eventually going to change it to this. So this should be salary based on experience within the whatever division, or for the division employees with gender identified. So let's come back here real quick and just change that. So what we're going to want it to be is salary analysis for the salary analysis by based on experience for the such and such, and then salary analysis based on experience for all employees with indicated. So that's our base. So we'll copy this and change the base of this as well. Should be a space in between there. And then salary analysis based on experience for the employees in such and such with this indicated. Okay, so now let's go back and look, see how that reads. Should be a little bit more in line, because the intent is to take this eventually and put it here in our title. But before we do that, I want to show you how we can update the trend line. Okay, so there we go. Division based on experience for the finance division employees. Okay, so we got to change that. That didn't change. Yep. Okay. Okay. So let me go back here and change that real quick. Okay, I went ahead and changed that and paused the video. You didn't need to watch me do that. So now that's all good. So we have an extra semicolon there. Okay, so now this here is all good. So now what we want to do is we want to take the value of this trend line, and this is just hard-coded in here. We don't need to dynamically update this. We're going to have either linear or polynomial. I doubt we'll ever need to change this, so I just have this hard-coded in here. But the intent is to take this trend line type, either from linear or polynomial, and change it based on what's selected here. So let's come back over here to our code. And let's find that trend line. Now, one thing that we're going to have to really pay attention to here is what is happening when. So we need to change cell trend line type. Okay, got it. And if you see this on change, I have currently set to update trend line function. We can, and more than likely, I will do this by just adding this whole thing into this comp filter event, just so we can keep things a little bit clean and not have functions lying all around. But what we're going to need to do is change, here it is, change this trend line at the 0 series and the type. So we're going to need to kind of take this object and drill into this to set this linear or polynomial. But what we're going to have to do is ensure that this constant object or options here is called at a certain time, because if we don't, then this piece is just not going to render correctly. It's going to try to call and reference something that doesn't exist. Okay, so for the way I'm going to approach this is I'm going to go through the top of this code here, all the way up here to where we start fetching our data. And I'm going to ensure that we have essentially everything in place and it's happening in order. So the first thing that we are going to do is grab our fetch data in chart. But before we do that, we need to declare some variables here that we are going to need to grab. Because what's going to happen is initially the chart is going to be drawn as normal, and then we need to grab the value of that drop down box and then essentially redraw the chart. So once this function runs, it's going to need access to the options variable, the chart, and the chart data. So let's go ahead and create, before we even do anything, let's declare some global variables. And I know we're doing this all in the head, up here in this head section of our HTML. And when you're dealing with charts, all charts need to be rendered in the head. So anything that's kind of dealing with the charts and that we're running with the charts needs to also be in the head. So anytime that you have a dashboard style HTML, your head section is just going to be massively long depending on what it is. And that's normal. So let's create an options variable and let's just make this empty. And I'll put a comment in here and we'll just say this is declaring options globally. And what I mean by globally is it's not attached to or restricted in scope to any specific function there. And then we need the chart. Declared chart globally. And let chart data also be empty. So we're just declaring these variables. And this is important because if you don't declare these up here, then whatever function we write, that update trendline function, won't have access to it because these currently exist in other variable or other functions. Okay, so we have that, and then we're going to essentially grab our data. Yep, that's fine. And then we're going to run our process data chart. Yep. Then we're going to come up here and grab this And this is going to initialize. And that's the key. It's initializing this. Because remember, we declared this right here. Right now, before this function runs, this chart data has nothing in it. It's declared, but it's just empty. And what this is doing now is it's taking this and filling it. So that's what we want. Initialize global chart data. Okay, so that's good. And then we're going to define our columns. Yep. And then we got to initialize these things for our calculations. Then we're going to need to run our for each, which is okay. And let's see, then we'll perform our calculations. Ooh, that's bothering me. Okay, we'll run our calculations. Okay, so now we get into our chart options. And because we put our chart options up top there globally, we can change this comment to initialize global options. Okay, goods. And then the other one that we're going to need to initialize here is our charts. So now the options global is now being initialized, and now this chart here is also being initialized. Okay, good. And we're eventually going to have to do the same thing to this legend container, because we are going to need to do this dynamically based on what our demographic is. So when we get to that point, we're kind of having to do the same thing. So we'll do global chart data here. Okay, so then we'll do the legend, and then we do this set onload callback. Okay, good. So now where we want to place this function to update the chart line is going to be after we initialize the chart, because we need to initialize the global variables of chart data, as well as the options before we can do anything to the trend line, because we want it to run and then update and then run again with those new values. So where we want to put this function is essentially going to be right after our chart. So we can simply put this right here, and it's going to be a function update trend line. That. And then what this function is going to do is we're essentially going to need to grab the value of that Sal trend line type. We can create a constant for this. It's not going to change. And we'll call this variable trend line type. And this is going to equal the document get element by ID. And that ID is going to be our Sal trend line type. Let's make sure that I grab this correctly. This thing. Make sure I spell it right so we can get this hopefully on the first go. And what we're going to need to do is grab our value of that. And then we need to take that and essentially update the options. We need to take that value and update this options variable, drilling into the trend line 0 and type. And then we need to set the value of that to that piece. So let me save this first, just in case we have a hiccup. I don't want to have to come back and retype this. You know what I'm going to do first, though, just to save ourselves some time in case this doesn't work? I'm going to give us a console log. This is for debugging. And I'll just put in here selected trend line is. Actually, let's make this literal so we can check this. This way, if something doesn't work, we can open up our console log by hitting F12 and then figure out exactly what is happening. And this is, I'm just going to put debugging. There we go. Okay, so now let's update that. Let's update that trend line. Update the trend line in options. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to select this options. We're going to select this options object here. And then we need to get into the trend line at the 0 index or the series. And then we got to select the type. So since we're dealing with an object, we separate every drill down, so to speak, by a period. So this is going to be trend lines at the 0 index, and we're wanting to isolate the type, and that type is going to be our trend line type. Okay, so that should take care of that. And now what we need to do is, now that we updated that, we need to redraw our chart. And if you remember how we redrew our chart, it was this right here. So what we need to do is simply just grab this and just call it. Now we can access this chart because instead of having this chart stuck here within our function, remember we set that to global. So now everything that we need that was locked into a function is now global and we can access it. And then we should not to do anything with that because that's before it. Okay, so let's save this and then check it out. Let's see what we got. Okay, good. So it's populating correctly. By default, it's linear. Just make sure that this is good. Yep, okay, so that changes. Good. So the chart is still being redrawn here. So now let's try and change the option of this trend line. So by default, it's linear. Let's change it to polynomial. And nothing. Let's change it back to linear. And nothing. Okay, so let's go back and see what it is that we did here. All right, so let's see what we got here. I see exactly what we did. So what we did initially to get this working was we created constant variables. Now, a constant variable means that it can't be changed. So if we were to simply remove this and select options, because remember, we declared it globally up here, so we don't need to try to declare it again. So we got the options, we got the chart, and let's change the chart data. Where's the chart data? Chart data. Here it is. And if we do the chart data and then save this, let's go back and see how that works. Okay, let's refresh this. because now it shouldn't be trying to declare anything. It should just be filling that global variable with the data that we select. So by default, it's linear. And by choice, it's going to be polynomial. And there we go. And now if we change this, it'll still be default to linear, but we can change it. So we'll have to change this back to linear or change this to line type again. But as you can see, now we can toggle our line. Okay, good. So now that we can actually change this, I'm going to end this video here because we created the functionality to change a options object dynamically with a select box, and we can clean this up by having it default just like we did with our finance and choose and all that. That's too easy. We can just take that and use what we already have. But now what we can do is I can go over and grab what we did here to change this. And instead of doing it down here in our JS, right here, I can simply take the salary analysis header piece, and instead of this, I can put it in the object dot title, and it would produce this. So I'm going to go ahead and end the video here and then do that offline. And then the next video, if you're following along, you'll be able to see that, and I'll hit on it a little bit. But that is how you're able to dynamically change the options within a chart. And the key is to really look at what is happening when and what is needing to happen. And oftentimes you're going to need to pull those, actually every time you're going to need to pull the data that is going to the chart itself, as well as the options out from that function and make it a global function in order to be able to reference it over and over and over again. So I hope you enjoyed what we're putting together here. If you are, please hit that subscribe button. If you have any ideas or requests on what it is that you would like us to put together, say on like CSS, HTML, or whatnot, please let us know that. Our email is in the descriptions. And until next time, please take care.